Hi, I'm the Int from Down the Hobbit Hole blog.
And I'm the Unicorn.
We're here today talking about Spider-Man Far From Home and our kind of general thoughts on it. So before we get into like the meat of the plot and all that, we're going to talk about just kind of a few facts about it. So it's rated PG-13. What's our age suggestion on
Our
this?
age suggestion is 10 and up. If you've been able to handle the previous Marvel movies, you're going to be fine on this one.
The only exception might be there's kind of we call it kind of a trippy nightmares, a few trippy nightmare scenes that can be kind of really scary for little ones. Just kind of be aware of those. But once again, we've had a lot of darker things in the MCU, so we're probably okay.
Yeah.
And then the other warning is that you need to have seen Endgame to fully appreciate this movie.
Yeah, it's a driving force in this movie.
Yes.
So you're gonna.
Yeah, and this is the last movie of Phase 3,
yes.
so it's going to, kind of close out that story pretty well. So
I've heard it described as an epilogue, which I think is very fitting for it.
Yeah, I like
Endgame
that.
is like the big final chapter, and then the epilogue, what comes after the final battle or whatever.
Yeah.
All right, so the first thing we wanted to talk about was all the amazing actors
For sure.
in this movie. There's these two guys who play the two teachers who are like shepherding the field trip.
Yeah, their names are Martin Starr and J.B. Smoove.
Yes, those are the actors, and they are hilarious.
And J.B. Smoove is one of the coolest names that I've ever seen for such a dorky character.
It is. It's amazing.
Yes.
And they are just two of the funniest people in this movie. They are great comedy relief.
Yes, one of my favorite lines, and it gets mentioned a lot, is that there's a science teacher, and he's like, as a scientist, I have a theory for what's going on. Witches. And it's one of the funniest lines of the movie.
It is hilarious. And then also along with that, also on the field trip, you have Zendaya and Jacob Batalon, and they are so good in this movie.
Yes, and they play off each other a lot in this movie.
Yeah, they do, because they play very similar roles of being Peter's sidekicks in a way, being his supporters.
Yes.
I think that, especially in this movie for Zendaya, it was a lot better for her because in Homecoming, she was there.
Yeah.
She was more observing than truly being in action.
Yeah. And even in Homecoming, you didn't even realize until like the very end of the movie that it is Mary Jane Watson.
Right.
Like that character. You just kind of know her as
They
had a nickname for her in that movie. I don't remember what it was, but in the very end, she's like, my friends call me MJ, and that was kind of the big reveal that this is Mary Jane. So.
Yeah, so it's cool to see her have some more stuff to do. And then with Jacob, he's hilarious.
He is.
He's forever hilarious.
Yeah, he was great in Homecoming. He's great in pretty much all of these so far. And he's one of the bigger comic reliefs, I would say, of this movie.
Yeah.
There's actually quite a few comic reliefs in this movie.
Yeah, it's a very funny movie.
It is. It really is. But he just plays one of the more interesting comic reliefs because he's got a depth to his character as well that some of the other ones don't have.
Yes, definitely. And then we wanted to talk about Jake Gyllenhaal. He is incredible in this movie. He really helps carry it.
Okay, I think from this point,
it's spoilers.
We're going to get into some spoilers for the entire movie, so just kind of, if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to know, I think this is probably the point where it's like, we'll see you later, go watch it. It's very much worth it, so.
Yes, very much.
Go now.
Alright, so if you're still here, you've seen the movie, or you don't care about getting spoilers. Jake Gyllenhaal plays a character named Mysterio in this movie, and Mysterio is kind of built up as
kind of like the next big superhero is really what he's portrayed as. He comes in during these apocalyptic scenes and fights off the villain.
Yes, and so he becomes friends with Peter, and in a twist, he actually worked for Stark Industries. His barf technology from Civil War was stolen by Tony Stark and marketed as barf, which is understandable.
Yeah, he's frustrated from that.
That all his intellect would be used to be used in a product called barf.
Yeah, and much less because he sees the potential in this technology as being this revolutionary, and not only does Tony name it barf, but he also just uses it as a simple display for something. Like it's not this big thing that it could be, which as it turns out it becomes in this movie. He uses
very
it.
Important.
Yes, for sure.
Yes. And so he's just incredible in this
Yes.
movie. The way he plays the twist, you 100% believe.
And the way that he plays the good guy, the father figure of Peter Parker is phenomenal. And then 100%. As soon as he turns that evil, he can turn that evil on too.
Yeah, there's a scene where they are in a bar and they've just fooled Peter into giving over his most valuable weapon, the last thing that Tony Stark left to him. And he gives this speech to rile up all the other, like all his other team members who are also people who have been hurt by Tony Stark in some way, employees.
And it even goes back to Iron Man 1. There's a character. I'm really curious to actually watch Iron Man 1 to see if like that actor is actually the actor. He is. That's amazing.
Yes. He gets yelled at by Obadiah. Obadiah something.
Yeah.
And he's like, the fact that they can take that and draw it all the way back there is insane.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal's awesome, and then
yes, for sure.
Tom Holland is just
perfect.
It's amazing.
So we've talked a lot off camera about how much we both love Tom Holland. So
yeah,
I'm gonna peel back the curtain a little bit. Her father doesn't want her to profess her love for Tom Holland through video. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna profess my love for Tom Holland through video. So Tom Holland, if you're watching, I love you, and even though I am married and have a child, I will marry you.
Same here.
She doesn't have a child.
Oh no, I'm not married nor have a child, but I will marry you.
Yes, but on a more serious note, ish. He's very pretty. That wasn't serious, but he is legitimately a phenomenal actor.
Yes. There's a couple other movies that are coming out later this year with him in them, and I'm very excited to see them, not just because of my love of Tom Holland, but genuinely because he is such a compelling person to watch on screen. And even as just a celebrity, he's very compelling to listen to.
And the fact that he plays this teenage high schooler, American teenage high schooler,
as a British 23-year-old man, is very impressive.
Yes.
And I've never for a second doubted when he's on screen with Peter Parker that he is Peter Parker, he is Spider-Man, and he is a 17-year-old kid from Queens. Like, that's not something I've ever questioned now.
No, for sure. So, kind of coming from that, so Spider-Man's story throughout this movie is amazing in my opinion.
Yeah, it's really well written.
It really is. So one thing I want to talk about for a second is the kind of allusions that we have to Iron Man 1, because to me that was one of the most compelling parts of this movie. So like throughout the entire movie, once again, if you haven't seen Endgame, this is a big spoiler, but throughout the entire movie, they're trying to figure out who's the next Iron Man since Tony Stark died in Endgame. And so many people are looking to Spider-Man, because I think a lot of people know that Spider-Man was mentored by Iron Man. And so we have this story of who's the next Iron Man, and it kind of mirrors that story in Iron Man. Not that we're trying to figure out who's the next Iron Man, but we're developing the first Iron Man in the first Iron Man. But I think when it really kind of comes into fruition in this movie is when both characters have nothing left and they have to build up themselves, and they actually both have to create suits, which I think is really interesting. So Tony, when he's overseas and he's stuck in that cave and he's building his suit from just like scrap metal, and that's when he creates the first Iron Man suit. Which is probably one of the biggest scenes of that movie.
Yeah, I mean, it was big enough that's like the sound of him hammering is what they ended Endgame with.
Yes.
So.
And then in this movie, in Spider-Man Far From Home, you have Peter, after failing to use the technology that Tony left him failing his friends and thinking that everyone is doomed, he has to rebuild himself emotionally, and he also gets to rebuild his Spider-Man suit. Which is really cool.
Yeah, and that was in that scene, Happy's there too, and he's just giving him a little pep talk saying, listen, Tony's not as great as everyone else thought he was. He struggled with decisions. He struggled with the best way to not just live his life, but to protect everyone he loved around him. Not just that, but to protect the whole universe.
Yes.
And through that, there's this awesome parallel where you see Happy watching Peter build his suit, and Peter doesn't see what you're seeing, or in what Happy's seeing, but it is truly so emotional to watch.
For sure.
Him building his suit, and he looks like a young Tony Stark, like doing this. It's really powerful.
It really is. It's such a good storyline through that. One of my favorite things too is that they actually kind of turn itself on its head in one of the storytelling aspects, because in Iron Man you have this very cocky, like overly confident character who has to get broken down and humbled in order to become a superhero. That's what makes him Iron Man. And although Spider-Man's already Spider-Man in this, you take this fairly low self-esteem kid who doesn't think he's good enough to be Spider-Man, let alone Iron Man, and he has to be built up. His confidence has to actually increase to make him feel capable of getting his full potential, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the post scenes, I'll let you talk about the last little part that mirrored each other. I thought those were really interesting.
So in the end, after you stay through the mid credits, because of course it's a Marvel movie, you gotta watch. And so there's a scene. Peter's taking MJ swinging throughout the city in his Spider-Man suit, and he gets ready to leave her, and just like on the street to do whatever. And all of a sudden, there's a live broadcast, and there's there's footage of Mysterio's last moments, and they've manipulated the footage, which is a big thing in this movie, manipulating things. And you see them manipulate the footage to make it sound like Peter's the bad guy, and Peter's the one who killed Mysterio, I think even Tony Stark they imply that he killed Tony Stark, or... Yeah,
that he was like trying to replace Tony Stark.
Yeah,
He's I will be the next Tony Stark. Right, it's kind of the implication.
And so you see him kill Mysterio and try and kill the entire population.
Yeah.
And
and then like right before Mysterio is killed, he does die, but he looks at the camera and says, "Spider-Man is," and then it cuts out for a second, and then it
comes back up, and it's like, Spider-Man is Peter Parker. And so now there's this huge question.
Yeah, what now?
Yeah, but the parallels to that, whereas Tony had, he decided in front of all these people at a press conference today, I am Iron Man.
And that was at the end of Iron Man 1, which was a really cool parallel, I think.
Yeah, and then you have this one where it's an interesting parallel because it isn't quite the same.
Yeah.
Whereas...
one of them is a choice and one of it is forced upon, but they both have their identity revealed one way or another.
Which is obviously one of Peter's biggest fears.
Yeah.
Which, understandable. I wouldn't necessarily want everyone to know that I was Spider-Man.
I don't even want everyone to know my name. That's why I call myself the Ent.
Fair enough.
So, another point that I thought was really interesting, just kind of storytelling wise, is the way that father figures play such a big role in Peter Parker's story. And it kind of always has in one way or another. In pretty much every Spider-Man story, at least Peter Parker's story, you have Uncle Ben. That's kind of his big first father figure, because his father disappears for several reasons, depending on what you read. But you have Uncle Ben, who, as hopefully you all know, he dies, and that's like his first loss of a father figure. And then in this universe, in the MCU, Tony Stark kind of steps in as his new father figure.
Yeah.
And that's great until Infinity War. Because
Really?
then that's when Peter Parker dies.
Yeah, and that's what you see break Tony.
Yeah, that broke Tony. And then if you look at Endgame through Peter Parker's perspective, it's terrible because he gets brought back from the snap, and then the day he gets brought back, Tony dies.
Yeah.
Which is just horrendous. Like, that's a terrible thing to even contemplate. So, both of his father figures going into Spider-Man Far From Home have died.
Yeah.
And so I think the way they played this, which is really interesting, is I think he's kind of desperate for a father figure.
Yeah, he's desperate for the attention from a male figure in his life to love him and to be there for him.
Yeah, and then going back to like Jake Gyllenhaal's character Mysterio, he plays into that so well. He's so supportive and so understanding of what Peter Parker is going through. So it turns out it's all trickery, but he comes off that way, and so Peter almost latches himself to him immediately. And this is where we kind of have to bring up Edith. Do you remember what Edith stands for?
Even dead, I'm the hero.
Yes, it's the technology, which is actually like the Iron Man glasses that he gives Peter, and it's this whole system of armory and technology. It's an insane amount.
It's like basically all of Stark Industries
in glasses.
In glass form.
Yeah. So, and even to the point where it's like, if he says, "Hey, kill this person," there is a satellite up in space that sends drones down to attack. So, which plays into this movie quite a bit.
Yes.
And that's one thing I really thought was interesting. So, once again, with the father figure, so not only does he have Mysterio, who's kind of his current father figure, turn on him, but he has to defeat him, which is something he hasn't had to do, because most of his father figures have just died being heroes. But he has to defeat his father figure, and he also, we have to kind of talk about this. So at one point, he hands Edith off to Mysterio because he trusts him. And so from that point on until pretty much the end of the movie, he has to fight Edith. So he has to deal with all that armory and all that technology, which is Tony Stark's. And so the way I saw it is, not only does he have to defeat Mysterio, but he also has to defeat the technology of Tony Stark, his other father figure. Yeah,
and as we all know, Tony Stark is a very intelligent man.
Yes. And he creates very good technology.
Yes, and it's not very easily broken.
No.
And so the whole idea of him trying to defeat not only Mysterio, who was father figure turned evil, but also trying to defeat Tony Stark has not as much of an emotional impact in terms of, oh, I have to defeat my dad, but more as in a bringing Tony back up in his life again, which is still not fully healed. Like, he's still processing the death in this movie.
And even then, even just breaking down near the climax of the movie, kind of the happy scene that we talked about, he has to defeat the idea of Tony Stark / Iron Man.
Because one of the huge points of this movie is who's going to be the next Iron Man. And for Happy to sit him down and be like, listen, kid.
Yeah.
Tony was great, but he's not as amazing as everyone thinks he was. And he doesn't mean it in a bad way. He just means it simply as he's human.
Yeah.
He's a human, and you're a human. And even Tony Stark couldn't live up to Tony Stark.
Yeah.
So, in a way that they don't just decide who's the next Iron Man, but they break down that concept of who Iron Man is and says he was a human who just helps the people.
Yeah. He was really smart, and he chose you.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part, is because he's dealing with the fact that Tony Stark chose him to basically take on that role, and he can't handle that.
He's a 17-year-old kid.
So,
understandably.
So he that's a big. I think that's a big reason why he hands it off, because I think he tricked himself into saying, "Oh, I'm supposed to select the next Iron Man. I'm not supposed to be the next Iron Man. There's no possible way."
Yeah, he undersold himself to himself.
For sure.
And then one of the last topics we wanted to talk about was how they portray high school in this movie. In this movie, the whole premise of it is that they are going on a school field trip, summer trip. So you have all of his classmates, very diverse bunch, which is awesome for what filmmaking is now. That there's a scene where they're all on a boat in Venice, and you're like, wow, that is
a diverse group of people.
Yeah, which, I mean, as you would expect it to be in New York. Or anywhere, really, at this point. And one of the things that I found myself relating to a lot, where I found myself, at the point where I was, about to cry multiple times in the movie, was just how real that struggle of him trying to figure out who he's supposed to be in light of Iron Man, in light of everything that's going on, trying to replace Iron Man. The idea of trying to figure out who you're supposed to be is very relatable to a lot of, I would say almost all high school students. It's something I felt, something I know a lot of my friends have felt. And so the fact that they were able to show that, but not just in like, this is a high schooler. Look at him. He has problems. Not just in that way, but to also really make it real.
Yeah, make you feel that.
Yeah, make you
feel the awkward, because like the awkwardness in this movie is grand.
Yes,
and it has a payoff. It has a very good payoff, but especially between him and Mary Jane.
Yeah.
Like most of the movie, it's just so awkward because you can just feel that tension between them.
Yeah.
That does pay off at the end. But...
Yes. Yeah. So that was really good. And then there's this scene at the beginning where he's at a charity benefit for Aunt May. Aunt May has asked him to be there and to help support her, and he goes out to talk to all these reporters who are there.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they start bombarding him with questions with, "Are you Iron Man? Are you the next
What's
Iron
next?
Man?
What's happening with the Avengers?" And then it comes the full culmination is, "Are you Iron Man? Are you who's the next Iron Man? Are you it?" And
and so he almost goes into a little bit of like an anxiety attack, just like he has to escape and just get out of there. And I think that's very realistic for a lot of people my age, being bombarded with the question of,
what are you going to do for the rest of your life?
Yeah, what are you? Who are you? What's going on?
Yeah.
On a slightly lighter note of high school, this movie does a great job of portraying high school relationships. In this movie, Ned, who's Peter's best friend, starts dating a girl named Betty. And it is the funniest thing. They
it really is.
hate each other, and then they get sat next to each other in the plane, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, they're dating.
Yes.
And
they're not just dating, but they're like that.
They're that annoying. They're the obnoxious, annoying couple that's always taking photos and like getting the like little touristy pictures of yourselves done and all of that fun stuff. And I'm like, these are my friends. Like, what's happening here? Like, you're portraying every high school couple pretty much I've ever known.
And then true to form on that, like, as soon as the trip is over.
Which is like a 1 week trip, maybe. Like, they're dating for a week and then they get back and he's like, Peter's like, hey, maybe like we should do a double date sort of thing. And he's like, Ned's like, oh man, no, I had to be the bigger person. It's just not right now. It's not the time for me to date, Just gotta be the bigger person.
Yes, you grow as people, and sometimes you grow apart after a week of dating.
Like, when did you ever grow together? When did that happen?
Yes.
And so one last thing we wanted to touch on was the post-credit scenes. Obviously, it's a Marvel movie. There's gonna be some post-credit scenes. We already talked a little bit about the scene where Peter's identity gets revealed as Spider-Man.
And that's gonna be a very interesting.
Yeah, because there's a lot of ways they could backtrack it.
Yeah.
Just because that's such I think a pretty key part of Peter's character as Spider-Man is that no one knows who he is. But then there's also a post-credit scene where you have Nick and Maria, and they're driving in the car, and all of a sudden Nick takes a phone call, and it looks very much like a normal like phone call Fury would take, and then all of a sudden you realize it all melts away, and you're like, holy cow, Maria Hill and Nick Fury are Skrulls.
Yes.
Look at that. And
just to clarify, if you haven't seen Captain Marvel, you might be really confused by that.
Skrulls are aliens that are shape-shifting aliens that look like anyone they could choose to be. Yeah. So I could be a Skrull for all you know.
I am a Skrull. Oh
no. So we do see. It was a little bit concerning me at first because then it flashes to the actual Fury, not Skrull Fury, on the phone with them, and he's like, "Do I have to come back to Earth? Like, don't make me."
And he's sitting there. It's funny because he's like sitting there on a beach,
a very badly green screened in beach, and I was like, "Please, no."
I'm not gonna lie. Like, I was like, "Okay, this is like I believed that it was supposed to be the beach." So, and then I was like, that just doesn't seem like Nick Fury to me. I don't think he'd ever be on a beach. That's so weird. Yeah. And then he stands up and he's in a room and the whole thing disappears and he's on a spaceship.
Yeah. And it looks like maybe he's working with Captain Marvel on something. It's kind of unknown.
Yeah.
Could be maybe a setup for like Captain Marvel 2 or
Yes.
something like that. But
yeah, I think one of the more interesting parts of the conversation that they had is Skrull Nick Fury was saying, everyone's asking me what's happening with the Avengers, and that's not a question I can answer.
right.
And so I think that's something that's going to lead into this Phase 4 is who are the next Avengers, since we lost half the Avengers in Endgame.
Yeah.
We lost
we
lost Iron Man.
Yeah, we lost Iron Man. We lost in a way we've lost Captain America as far as everyone else kind of knows. He's kind of dead.
Yeah.
We've lost Vision.
We lost Black Widow.
We lost Black Widow, which is huge.
Yeah. Because out of the original Avengers, you have the six original. Six original Avengers. You killed off 3 of them.
Yes.
So you still have Hulk, you have Thor, and you have Hawkeye.
Yes.
We know what's happening with Hawkeye pretty much just from from plans, but we'll talk about that later maybe. We're not really sure what's happening with Hulk.
Yeah, we know that Mark Ruffalo has been very vocal about he's still a part of the MCU. He's still doing stuff, but it's like,
but what?
Where? What are you doing?
And then I think we're under the assumption that Thor is going to be in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and then a few movies after that at least. So
it's very interesting to see what will happen in the next phase.
Yeah, I think that's about it. So to see our kind of full review, go to downthehobbitholeblog.com. We'll put a link down in the description. Any closing thoughts?
I love you, Tom Holland.
Same. Go see the movie if you haven't seen it. Check it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll cut some more at that point.